How do you recover from an ED without professional help? That's the topic of today's video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out some of my free resources below. Don't forget to check out my free ebook, The 5 Steps You Must Take to Stop Binge Eating Now. And I do apologize for the lawn equipment outside. It's summertime. I can't avoid it. There's no good time of the day to make a video without weed whackers and leaf blowers. So again, I apologize. A lot of people with EDs think they need professional help, whether it's a therapist or formal rehab. Some do, others don't. Just as a disclaimer, I'm not a psychotherapist and I am not an addiction counselor. I'm a physical therapist by trade who happened to deal with eating disorders for a good portion of my life. The advice that I provide is based on my own experience and based on my own research. I never went to professional therapy. I think I saw a therapist 3, maybe 4 times in the early stages of my disorder. At the time, I didn't really think I had a disorder, and that was the problem. I didn't think I had a problem. I think my parents sent me there, and because what else did you do back then? This is 10, 11 years ago. You couldn't just go online and find a coach. There weren't a lot of YouTube videos about this stuff. But this was before the crap hit the fan. This is before I started chewing and spitting. This is before I started, taking food out of dumpsters and spitting it out. It's before I started binging, purging. So I didn't think anything was wrong. It was shortly after that everything erupted. But other than that, I never sought professional help. I never went to a rehab center. I never went to a therapist. I never went to an eating disorder center or anything like that. I was on my own. Because I didn't want to tell anybody. I was too ashamed of it. I always thought the recovery was just around the corner. But next week turned into next month, next trimester, next year, next decade. You get the picture. If you want to hear my whole story, there are previous videos on that. So if you have an ED in 2020, there's never been a better time to have an ED. Because you have so many other options these days. Options that I didn't have not too long ago. You don't necessarily need to seek professional help. And one of the reasons I made this video is to help you determine whether you need to go to professional help and how to find the right help. I'm not here to crap on rehab and on therapists. There are some really good therapists out there, and there are some really good rehab options. But not everybody needs to go that route. Alright, without further preface, let's get to it. When should you seek professional help? I think if you have other mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, trauma, could be any of those or all of them. I sometimes get people on the phone and they've got this problem and that problem and that problem, and just thinking, I cannot help you. If you have all of these other problems plus an ED, that is like a giant ball of yarn, and somebody who has professional credentials probably needs to untangle that. If all you have is an eating issue and everything else in your life is pretty stable, which I find is the majority of cases, I can probably help you, or some other coach. There are other coaches out there. They're not hard to find, but that to me is a red flag. If you have a bunch of mental health disorders plus the ED, seek professional help. If you are going to seek professional help, then you need to find a therapist who specializes in EDs. Not all of them do. I would not just go to some therapist or counselor because you got a recommendation or because it's in network and the insurance company pays for it. That's actually a really bad reason to choose a therapist, just because a third party will pay for it. You need to choose a therapist that understands your problem. Better yet, find a therapist who has dealt with an ED herself. Those are usually the best ones. Have you ever been to therapy or a rehab center? I want to hear your experiences. Let me know in the comments below. Now, what about Overeaters Anonymous and other 12-step programs? Personally, I don't recommend those. If you have an eating disorder or just disordered eating habits, you don't need to sit in a group and talk about your latest episode. Many of these 12-step programs are not run by professional counselors. They don't have any special training. They've just been through the program themselves. So the quality of training in those programs is not very good. And we don't have data to show that these programs help. Alcoholics Anonymous, what's the success rate? Maybe 5%. And the only thing that predicts your success in AA or OA is the amount of time that you spend. It could be that the programs themselves are not helping. It's just that some people who go through the programs for months and years recover organically. You do not need to sit in a group and share stories and talk about all your problems. I like the community aspect of those programs. However, for a lot of people, that's not what you need. What you need to do is to dive deep into the psychology and understand why you're doing it. Another thing you need to consider is duration, severity, concurrent mental health issues, and cost. So let's take a look at all of those. Duration. How long have you had an ED? The longer you've had it, usually the harder it is to get rid of it. Doesn't mean it's impossible. So don't think that. But if you've had an ED for 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to take a little while to unravel those habits. So think about it. 15, 20 years. Let's just say you've been bulimic for 10 years. How many times have you binged and purged? Thousands of times. So you're not going to recover overnight unless there's some sort of miracle. Probably not even in a month. It might take you several months to get to where you need. But think about that. If you've been bulimic for 10 years and you can recover in several months, I would say that's a pretty good trade. The other thing you need to consider is severity. How often are you doing it? I know that the DSM, which I've made a video on before, talks about low frequency. I think those criteria and those definitions are a little vague and a little arbitrary. Why 30 days anyway? But let's just say you're binging, purging once a week or even just once a month. Probably a little easier to treat that. If you're doing it twice a day, every day, that's a little harder. That might require a higher level of intervention than just a coach. And like I said, you also want to consider concurrent mental health issues. If you have depression, suicidal thoughts, and a bunch of other things that are probably even more important than your ED, seek professional help. Also consider the cost. Psychotherapists are not free. Usually they're reasonably priced. If you can meet with a psychotherapist, let's say for $100, $150, that's probably like what you would pay in cash. Maybe I'm wrong. But if all they do is give you one or two key insights into your disorder and some action steps, and they help you understand what your problem is and where you need to go, it might be worth $100, $150. Think about it. If you have an ED, you're spending money on that ED. It's not free. Okay? Wasting all that food, purging it, chewing and spitting it, whatever. It's not a cheap habit if you haven't noticed already. Now, regarding rehab, this is my biggest complaint about rehab. Some of these rehab centers are $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a month. What's that one on the coast of California? I always forget the name, but they've got the horseback riding and the exercise classes and the Tai Chi and the hot stone massage, and none of that is really necessary. You're paying for it, but doesn't necessarily get you the result that you want. I think the data and the evidence suggest otherwise. I would highly discourage you from going to rehab unless you have a very severe case and nothing else has worked. If your life is literally on the line, then maybe that $10,000 rehab program might be your best option. This channel would not be possible without Essetino artists. If you want to start producing content and start your own YouTube channel, then check out the Creative Business Academy. There is a link below. But even professional help isn't always a cure-all. A lot of people who go to therapists don't get better. A lot of people who go to rehab don't get better. Again, I am not saying that it's because therapists don't know how to treat it. Some better than others. And I'm not saying that none of these rehab programs work, because some people get out of these rehab programs and they are successful. Great. What I'm saying is you shouldn't bank on seeing a therapist a few times and going to rehab and expecting this overnight transformation. The only person that can transform and change habits is you. You have to want to do it. And I guess that's a nice segue into my next point. You have to be willing to change this problem now. You have to have a certain level of urgency. Sometimes I get on the phone and I say, how urgent is this problem? And the other person will say it's a 6 or a 7. Listen, if it's not a 9 or a 10, you're probably not going to be successful in rehab with the therapist or with the coach. Thing is, if it's not urgent, you're not going to change it. We fix problems when they're urgent, when they're causing a lot of pain and distress in our lives. We run from pain and we seek pleasure. But if the pain isn't that bad, if you're willing to tolerate it for a few more months, maybe even another year, you're not going to change. And I guess that's one of my biggest problems with rehab and therapists is that a lot of times, especially if the person is young, is that professional help and treatment is imposed. So it might be the parents, or it might be a physician who says, or sometimes even a judge, if you get a DUI, and they say, oh, you've got to go to treatment. You've got to go to this 12-step program. The thing is, if it's imposed and it's not what you want to do, you're not going to get better. Period. You have to want to change, and you have to want to change now. That doesn't mean that you're going to change overnight, and it doesn't mean that this is going to be an easy process, but you have to have that sense of urgency. I do want to provide an encouraging note. Recovery, or what I call normalization, is often closer and more simple than you think. I am not trying to bait you. I'm not trying to say, oh, join my program and you'll be good in 10 days. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I think a big problem is that we make these problems too complicated. And what you need is simplicity. You need a more minimalist approach to treating these kinds of disorders. That's why I don't like 12 steps. That's why I don't like the idea of one day at a time. I don't like the idea of a recovery that takes 1 year. 2 or 3 months, sure, but 1 year, it probably shouldn't take 1 year. I like to say that recovery is simple, but not always easy. And that's a good way to see it. It is a simple process, but you're going to be tempted to do the other thing. Habits are powerful. Instant gratification is powerful. The instant escape is powerful. It's going to be alluring for a while. You're going to have this period where you're making progress, you don't want to do it, but there is that allure. Like, oh, I could escape for 20 or 30 minutes and put all of this fat and sugar into my mouth. That's the danger zone. When you're making progress and you have a desire to quit, but there's still that tug, and those new habits aren't automatic yet. So let's review. When do you need professional help, and when can you get a coach? What's the duration? What's the severity? What are your concurrent mental health issues? Do you have any at all? If you've only had an ED for 2 or 3 years and you don't have any other issues, seek a coach. If you are binging, purging twice a day and you've been doing it for 5 years and nothing else has worked, consider professional help. Avoid 12-step programs. I find that those don't work too well. If you're going to sit in a group and you're going to go to a physical location, you might as well see a psychotherapist or go to rehab. I think 12-step programs are the worst of both worlds. They require time and money, but they don't give you the level of attention and support that you need. And remember, you have to be willing to quit. If you're not willing to quit, you won't. Period. Hope you found this video educational and entertaining. Don't forget to subscribe and check out some of my free resources below. If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll like one of the other videos that you see on the screen. Click one of them, and I'll see you there.